Hello, I will be reviewing the 2017 Korean movie A Taxi Driver in this video. The director of this movie is Chang Hoon, a famous director who's directed other famous films like Rough Cut and The Front Line. The movie A Taxi Driver has a very talented cast with a lot of recognizable faces, such as Song Kang-ho, who is well known for his role in the movie Parasite, Ryu Chon-yeol, and other actors. This movie focuses on a widowed soul taxi driver who meets a German reporter in the hopes to pay off his rent. What he thought would be an easy job turns out to be a lot more different. The taxi driver, Kim Man-sop, is led into Gwangju, where he realizes something is happening and something is off. He wants to leave immediately when he gets to Gwangju, but unfortunately for him, that doesn't happen. He is instead forced up onto a rooftop where he sees the real problems within Gwangju. He sees people striking, and those people are met with police brutality. He witnesses the military brutally killing innocent people, beating people up, and having no remorse for their lives. Here, Kim Man-sop's mentality changes. Before, when he saw all these protests, he saw it as a waste of time and unnecessary complaints. But he's starting to realize that it is a bigger issue than he originally assumed. He now feels so much more responsibility to help Gwangju and its citizens. And after witnessing all of these horrible actions by the government, he and other citizens of Gwangju helped the German reporter take photos and smuggle them outside of Korea in order to show the terrible actions done by the government. This movie is based on a real-life tragedy, the Gwangju Uprising, which happened between May 18th, 1980 and May 27th, 1980. It is estimated that around 160 people were killed during this time frame. During this time, Gwangju citizens were rioting and protesting against Chun Doo-hwan's declaration of martial law. This led to direct military control against the civilian government control of the government. This uprising was due to the power struggle between the government and South Korean citizens, mainly young adults. The protests and riots mainly focused on democracy and freedom against a dictatorship. The conflicts in Gwangju was not only problematic for the Gwangju citizens, but also a big problem throughout Korea. So much so that the term Gwangju Uprising was forbidden in Korea for a long time. We even see in the movie that the German reporter, Peter, saw reporting guidelines given to all the other reporters. Some included no negative reporting about martial law, no report justifying or supporting student protests, and most importantly, no mentioning of Gwangju. We see that South Korea was very sensitive to martial law and the protests which occurred due to the new law that they even decided to censor all news, until the arrival of German reporter Jürgen Hitzpeter. Jürgen Hitzpeter was an actual German reporter who documented the massacres during the Gwangju Uprising with this driver, who's only known as Kim Sam-bok. He smuggled the videos and photos out of South Korea and sent the film to Germany, where it was released. On May 23rd, Jürgen Hitzpeter returned to Gwangju to photograph the liberation from the withdrawal of the martial law and the happiness the citizens felt. This movie taught me a lot about Gwangju Uprising, and I didn't know all of these events before this movie. I think what makes a historical movie so interesting is that you can learn so many new important events and important figures through movies. And there are many interesting elements in this movie that make it so engaging. One is the depiction of government censorship. Being an American citizen, it is very much a taboo to enforce any type of censorship on one's freedom or speech. We see that censorship is a big issue now with the popularity of the internet and social media. However, censorship was becoming a big issue in the 1980s with the popularization of the concept of democracy and freedom. In America, the 1970s was recognized as an era where women's rights, gay rights, and environmental movements were popular, and most importantly, the Vietnam War was continuing. The Vietnam War was a fight between democracy and communism, and after the Korean War, South Korea has been fighting that battle. We see that from this movie, the government censorship is done through martial law in order to keep the citizens in their place. The militia was then used to keep peace and stop many protests that would happen. These events in the movie show a country's fear of a loud public. This movie does an amazing job showing how the government is hiding their vulnerabilities with a loud and strong militia and censorship. The weak points of Korea was Gwangju, which is why the shutdown of all outside contact was with the city. It is amazing how it depicts a loud government as a weak one. Another interesting element in this movie was protests depicted outside of Gwangju, which highlights the media's role in hiding governmental flaws. Towards the end of the movie, we see that when Kim Man-seop returns to Seoul, he reads a newspaper discussing the recent protests at a nearby restaurant. The newspaper labels those protesters in Gwangju as rogue and violent. We even see that South Korea citizens believe this. We hear two people at the restaurant discussing the recent events of Gwangju. They say how in Gwangju innocent soldiers were killed due to violent college student protest, and how these students are hardcore communists. We know as the audience that the protesters are not communists and try not to be violent when possible. We witness how the police and the military are the corrupt ones that are using their violence unjustly. However, the regular citizens of South Korea who did not witness the same things we did will trust the media's perception of the protests, which unfortunately label the protest as communist regimes led by violent and rogue individuals. These elements of the movie highlight the importance of an unbiased media because news outlets of all kinds have a tight grasp on how people feel, think, and act. The government using the media to hide their mistakes, the outrage, and the innocent lives lost show how media can be used as a double-edged sword. With the increasing importance of news and media today with Fox News or BBC, it's important that we gain the most amount of information with the least amount of bias possible. These sources dictate how we think, feel, and act. It would hurt our perspective on the world with a biased news source, which is why it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, you can learn information easily and understand events around the world. But on the other hand, it can be used as a tool to puppet and manipulate how you think of a certain subject. The movie A Taxi Driver does an amazing job illustrating that double-edged sword. And this is the review of the movie A Taxi Driver. An amazing movie that does an amazing job depicting the fights between the citizens of South Korea and the government during the 1980s, especially for the fight for democracy.